Hello and welcome to Philosophy Roulette number 97, where we read philosophy and review it live. I don't know what I'm going to read, that's why it's roulette. Just come see what I get and read and review. You can also send me stuff, because that's just as likely that I have no idea what I'm reading then too. So please send me a suggestion on what to read. This morning I did some bioethics from over here, bioethics. So let's not do another bioethics one, even though that was good fun. That was this one here. Elsian Kingma and Suki Finn. Okay. More medical ethics. Let's keep going. Centaurus. I don't know what Centaurus is. Looks like a ton of reviews. Cold War atmosphere. Distorted information and facts in the case of free Europe balloons. Was it some sort of historical thing or political? Let's just take a look. Alright, so oopsie. So we've got a 6-page paper. Let's see if it's available and we can find out what Centaurus publishes in. Skulls and Blobs. Is this what I'm supposed to be reading? Collecting the meaning of scientific objects and resources from the 18th to the 20th century. Alright, so let's take a look if it is something worth reading right now. Alright. So this, it seems more history. We got history, and okay, yeah. So this is more of a history. Oh, it's the editorial too. All right, so that's why it was so easily available. So this is more of a historical thing. Yeah, transmission. Okay, so it's more like history of science. It looks like. Okay, I'm okay with history of science. I mean, well, we'll see. If it doesn't have anything I can't, like, philosophically critique, I might say no, but at least let me take a look for some, give the, journal a chance. What is this called? This is called The Gene from Genetics to Post-Genomics. Those words are too common. Yeah, Society for the History of Science. Alright, so yeah, some sort of historical perspective on the Kuhn structure of scientific okay. So, no, I tried. I gave him a shot. Was not able to find anything. Complexity is too hard to read because it's like sciencey numbers and whatever. Alright, and now we're getting back to stuff I looked at the other day. Alright, so. Who's right about rights? Well, obviously not the left. The left cannot be right because the right is right. The left is left. So, I don't see this paper here, which is too bad because it sounded like it could have been fun based on the title. Judging a paper by its title. That's right. Okay. Ubuntu philosophy and the consensus regarding. Okay, so I don't know what to read if there's nothing right here on the front page. Let's see. Medicine, healthcare, and philosophy. But I just did biomedical stuff this morning. And we just did reproductive stuff this morning too. Alright, so. The ethical obligation of the dead donor rule. Let's just see if it's available. Duties to demented parents. So, yeah, this looks like an open access article. So let's see how long it is and we can try. Try. Okay, this is reasonable. It's a double column, so that's about 16 pages. A little bit long for what I like to read, but that's okay. We got it, so we're reading it. Scientific contribution. Let's see. If it is science, I can't read it because it's just like, and then this number says this, and then that number says that. Nah, this isn't so. This is all text. Okay, so let's see if I can try. So we've got and if you can join me live in the chat, please do. You can get the link to this page by typing exclamation point paper in the chat box, and that will give you the link will pop back up. So here we go. One of the most tragic events in the lives of children is when one or both of their parents become incapable of remembering who they are. This is usually the result of severe dementia, but might have other causes as well, such as head injuries sustained in accidents. For the purposes of this article, I focus on cases where dementia is the cause. Although many children will continue to visit their parents in such cases, and indeed the very idea of ceasing to do so might be inconceivable to them, some will stop providing regular company. Whilst the reasoning for this might be manifold, a 2015 public survey by the British Alzheimer's Society suggests that the belief in keeping up contact has become pointless will usually play a major role. In the survey, no less than 42% of respondents reported that, in their view, maintaining contact with a person who could no longer recognize them did not serve any purpose. My aim in this article is to investigate whether adult children who cease visiting their parents once their parents lose the ability to recognize them might be morally at fault. In what appears to be the only scholarly treatment of the issue, Mills 03 has rejected this view. According to Mills, the kind of child-parent relationship that is necessary for children to have duties to visit their parents is lost when their parents become incapable of recognizing them. After setting out her argument in more detail, I will take issue with this view. Not only can it be morally incumbent on children to visit their parents who no longer remember who they are, my contention is that many children have such duties. As I show, these duties are grounded in any special interest that their parents have in their company, that is, any interest that they have in their children's company but not in their other people's company, with the possible exception of friends and other close relatives. The fact that visiting their parents might allow the children to comply with generic duties of sociability, and or the fact that such visits allow them to express any gratitude that they owe their parents. Before vindicating these claims, 3 clarificatory remarks are in order. First, my focus within this article is on parents who had both physical and legal custody of their children during the latter's childhood, or considerable part thereof. What this means is that during this period, the parents lived together with their children and were legally entitled to make important decisions about their upbringing, such as ones about their education, healthcare, and attendance of religious ceremonies. Whether children might have duties to visit parents who have not been closely involved with their lives, think of parents who were denied both types of custody early in their childhood lives, or who put their children out for adoption early after they were born, is a question beyond this article's remit. Second, visits are constructed as actions whereby people move in space, or rather space-time, in order to provide at least one person with their company. Children who visit parents with severe dementia often provide them with physical care in situ, for example by helping them shower, get dressed, and take their medicine. And there are good grounds for thinking that, especially within aging societies and societies with minimal welfare provisions, some children have a moral responsibility to do so. However, since I'm only interested here in when, if ever, children have a moral duty to visit their parents, understood as duties to offer them companionship as opposed to physical support, I assume arguendo throughout this article that their parents' physical needs are adequately met by care home staff, live-in care workers, and or robot carers, even though this is frequently not the case in practice. Third, when speaking of parents who no longer recognize their children, I am referring to individuals who are still conscious of their surroundings but who have lost the ability to identify their children as their own sons or daughters. In some cases, they might not even remember that they have children. Such cases ought to be distinguished from one where parents have simply lost the ability to differentiate among their children insofar as they have more than one child. That is, cases where they know that someone is their child but they cannot recall which child. Okay. The conditionality view. Let's begin by looking at Mill's view in more detail, which I will refer to as the conditionality view, as it maintains what children's moral duties to visit their parents are conditional upon their parents being able to recognize them. The reason why Mills believes that children are relieved of any duties to visit their parents when the parents lose the ability to recognize them is that the kind of relationship that she considers necessary for such duties to arise becomes impossible in such cases. She says, the obligation to participate in an ongoing relationship continues only when the relationship itself remains possible. I cannot have an obligation to be in a relationship with someone who cannot be in a relationship with me. It is one of the tragedies of senility that genuine relationships with other human beings are no longer possible. However, can't I continue to love unconditionally someone who is senile and manifest this love to him or her in various ways, even if he or she is not able to recognize it? Yes, ideally familial love continues through all alterations, but again, the relationship that is in many ways the foundation of the love cannot. Heartless as it may seem to say this, I see little point in spending extensive time with someone who does not know me for who I am. To do so is to engage in a pretense that a relationship still continues that tragically is gone forever. In short, the reason why Mills thinks that children can no longer have duties to visit their parents when the parents lose the ability to recognize them is that, in her view, there is little point in trying to maintain a child-parent relationships when the capacity for such recognition is lost. Though she does not indicate for whom it is futile, one might reasonably expect that it includes the parents, as filial duties are duties that are owed to parents. What does this futility consist of? Whilst this too is not specified by Mills, there are two possible interpretations. The first is that the parents cease to derive any benefits from being visited by their children because, as the thought goes, people can only benefit from being visited by individuals whom they recognize. Insofar as children can only have duties to things for whom, duties to do things for their parents that benefit their parents, it would follow that from this that it is impossible for them to be duty-bound to visit their parents. The second interpretation accepts that the parents generally have interest in being visited by their children even after losing the ability to recognize their children. However, it maintains that once they lose the ability to recognize them, they will lack any special interest in receiving filial visits, that is, any interest over and above their interest in receiving visits from an equally socially skilled strangers. To the extent that children can only have the duty to visit the parents if their parents derive benefits from their visits that they do not derive from visits by most other individuals, it would follow from this that filial duties cannot survive the loss of the parents' capacity to remember who their children are either. The next section suggests that the second interpretation of what the futility consists of is more plausible than the first. For now, it should be noted that insofar as the parents cease to derive any special benefits from being visited by their children once they lose the ability to recognize them, this would not only relieve children from their duties to visit their parents if we accept Mill's relationship account of filial duties. That is, duties that the children have towards their parents but not towards other individuals. Or other relationship accounts that have been proposed, for example, by English and Nijeski. It would also relieve children of such duties if we accept another influential account of filial duties developed by Keller. On this account, filial duties are generated by the fact that many children can provide their parents with goods that few, if any, other individuals can provide them with, such as joy and wisdom that people might acquire from being closely involved with a person's development throughout the course of her life, and feelings of intergenerational continuity and transcendence that interacting with one's children might provide, whilst filial duties can exist on this so-called special goods theory of filial duties, even when children and their parents do not currently have a relationship, or simply not a particularly good one. When parents cannot derive special benefits from their filial duty visits due to their inability to recognize their children cannot have duties to visit them based on this theory either. Okay, so a whole lot of setup here, and let's see what we got. Against the conditionality view. My aim in this section is to challenge the conditionality view. It is its first interpretation according to which children lack duties to visit parents who cannot recognize them because people cannot benefit from being visited by those whom they are unable to recognize is most easily shown to be false. Whereas I will suggest shortly that such visits might serve several parental interests, my focus here is on hedonic or well-being interests. The reason for this is that on most axiological theories, well-being, by which I mean the absence of pain and the presence of contentment and pleasure, is a morally significant good, even if it is not the only thing that matters, as some utilitarians contend. When we focus on the hedonic effects of filial visits, it soon becomes clear that the first interpretation must be incorrect. Though it is sometimes frightening and distressing for people with advanced dementia to be visited by those whose identity is unknown to them, as it would be for many of us if many of us were a stranger to appear in our home, there is ample evidence that such visits can be and frequently are enjoyable for those individuals, as well as the heightened feelings of well-being that they induce might persist for some time after the visit, even after the memory of the visit has been lost. In fact, the hedonic interests of people with severe dementia in being visited appear to be stronger than those of most other individuals. The reason for this is that this group is especially vulnerable to chronic loneliness, which has been found to contribute to a range of adverse outcomes, including depression, poor physical health, and suicidal thinking. One reason why people with severe dementia are particularly prone to chronic loneliness is due with the social losses that older people tend to experience. Not only does people's social networks shrink substantially as they reach old age, a large proportion of older adults lose their primary confidence due to the death of friends, partners, spouses, and siblings. Another reason is that compensating for these losses is often difficult for those with severe dementia. Apart from the fact that they might have age-related physical disabilities that reduce their abilities to socialize, such as deafness and diminished mobility, their disease imposes various hurdles to maintaining existing relationships and forging new ones. Beside a progressively diminishing capacity to form memories and to retain existing memories, these might include an impaired ability to recognize faces, as well as various disease-related behaviors that make it less enjoyable for others to spend time with them, such as repeated questioning, shouting, and swearing. A final noteworthy hurdle concerning the stigma on dementia. Whilst this stigma has abated within many Western societies over the past decades, there can be reports of people being shunned by friends, relatives, and other individuals upon revealing their dementia diagnosis. Mental health has been, I think there's been a bit of a campaign to destigmatize problems of this sort that has been somewhat effective. So, that we are on the way, but I take it that this point is we're still not quite there for destigmatizing all these sort of issues. Okay, special interests in filial visits. So far, I've suggested that the first interpretation of the conditionality view must be false. But what about the second interpretation? As may be recalled, this interpretation concedes that many parents retain interest in being visited by their children after they lose ability to recognize them. However, it maintains that, because of this loss, the parents lose any special interest in being visited by their children, that is, any interest in being visited by their children rather than by equally socially skilled strangers that derive from goods that their children can provide, but most other individuals cannot, or simply do not to the same degree. To the extent that parents need to have special interest in filial visits in order for their children to have duties to visit them, it follows on this view that children cannot be duty-bound to visit parents who have lost the ability to recognize them. I believe that there are two problems with this argument. The first concerns its minor premise, according to which parents cease to have special interest in being visited by their children once they lose the ability to recognize them. As I argue below, even when this ability is lost, there are different ways in which filial visits might promote parental interests that visits by most other individuals cannot, or simply not to the same extent. Excuse me. Well-being. To start with, some parents retain special interest in filial visits because their children are especially well placed to promote their well-being, which I have defined as the absence of pain and the presence of contentment and pleasure. This will often be the case when their children are already visiting them on a regular basis. To see why, it should be noted that even when parents do not recognize them as their children, it is not uncommon for them to remember that they are the same individual who visits them regularly, which may have the effect that they will miss them once they stop visiting, or simply reduce the frequency of their visits. But that is not all. Many children also have epistemic privileges that allow them to promote their parents' well-being better than most other individuals, with the possible exception of the parents' romantic partners, friends, siblings, and a few other select individuals. To see this, it ought to be observed that over the course of their lives, children tend to accumulate a considerable amount of information about their parents' beliefs, preferences, and character traits, as well as about various episodes of their parents' lives. This matters because such insider knowledge can be highly useful in deciding how to approach and interact with their parents so that their meetups can become more enjoyable for the latter, and would expect in many cases themselves. For example, they might use this information to decide what topics to raise when talking to their parents, what kind of gestures to make, when to be silent, and when to show affection and how. Especially when the parents have difficult personalities, getting these things right can have a big impact on their well-being. So this epistemic insight is pretty good because it will still benefit the parents, because there is still a point to dealing with someone who's as long as they're not completely the dementia hasn't completely taken their mind, you know a lot more about them than any other well-meaning person, and so your interactions with them will be significantly different than any other well-meaning person. And so that still might have a great effect on the parents, even if they can't recognize who they're interacting with. Okay, so issue 2, past autonomy. When people reach a level of cognitive impairment whereby they no longer recognize their children, they will have lost the capacity for autonomy, understood as the ability to independently endorse a conception of the good life and live in accordance with it more or less successfully. That does not necessarily mean, however, that they will have lost autonomy interested in filial visits, given that such visits might still honor their past autonomy. By this, I mean that such visits help fulfill certain future-oriented preferences that the parents had when they were still autonomous, namely preferences to continue to receive filial visits if they were to lose the ability to recognize their children. Though I am unaware of any survey data on this, such preferences appear to be widespread. Because of the love and affection that many parents have for their children, one may safely assume that a substantial share want their children to remain part of their lives, even if they were to lose the ability to recognize them. There might be exceptions to this. For example, some parents might not want to be visited by their children because they hold grievances against them, or because they do not want to be seen by their children in such an indigent state. Still, another group may not wish to receive filial visits because of the burdens this places on their children, or perhaps on other individuals who rely on their children's care and support, such as their partner or own children. Nonetheless, especially when parents had minimally decent relationships with their children beforehand, they developed severe dementia, and when their children do not live too far apart, one might expect that many would have wanted to continue to be visited by their children. When this is the case, filial visits fulfill a special parental interest, given that no one else can honor these past autonomous preferences. Of course, I don't know about that. Let's see what the presupposition is. Of course, all this presupposes that individuals who have irretrievably lost the capacity for autonomy do indeed have interest in having their past autonomy honored, whereas any attempt to vindicate this view is beyond this article's scope. I will just note here that other authors have offered compelling arguments for it, as well as that its moral significance is presupposed within many real-life contexts, including the practice of letting advanced directives bear on decisions about end-of-life care, and by the practice of allocating a diseased person's property based on their final will. My question here is, and this will sound a bit crass, but I mean, if they can't recognize you, they just want their children to come visit. I mean, what would be the difference of hiring an actor in this case to go visit your parents, because the actor is carrying out, as far as the parents know, their will, but like as best that as the parent can understand it at the time. So you're not honoring their past autonomy, but you're honoring their present autonomy based on their past autonomy. So the fact that they know that someone's coming to visit them and they don't know that it's not their child, then you're sort of fulfilling it in the capacity that it is understood, but you're not, but even though you're not honoring the past autonomy, you're honoring it as much as the parent can get out of it at that point. So it wouldn't even just do to have someone else go, but it would just do to have someone that they act as if they're you go. So that's a little weird, but maybe it would it depends how important you think this past autonomy, honoring their past autonomy is, because not all things in the past are worth recognizing the same in the future. So we'd have to see what that actually came down to. But it's an interesting point. Alright, so thus far I've suggested that for children to simply visit their parents who have lost the capacity to identify them as their children might honor their parents' past autonomy. Yet there are ways in which many children can interact with their parents during such visits that few others that might honor further future-oriented present preferences of the parents' past autonomous selves. That's a sentence is a mouthful to say. Prominent amongst these will be preferences to retain various memories for as long as possible. Such retention does not only matter to most people because they cherish specific memories, for example, memories of their marriage, graduation, the birth of their children, but also because most of us regard memory retention as a major part of identity preservation, that is, remaining the same person. Now, although accessing memories becomes increasingly difficult for those who suffer from dementia, there is evidence that providing individuals with dementia with cues from their past can help many to access memories that would have otherwise remained inaccessible to them. Such priming might occur, for instance, by showing them family pictures, playing music from their youth, or simply by recounting events from their lives. What is important for our purposes is that since children generally have greater knowledge about their parents' lives than most other people and are more likely to have access to various personal objects from their parents' lives, they will often be especially well placed to provide such memory-inducing cues. When this is the case, the parents will have special interest in filial visits that are conditional upon their children helping them to remember their past during such visits. Is this really just the a different version of this well-being thing because of the epistemic privilege that was said over earlier? Over here. I mean, I'm not seeing how this is a separate point. Or is this just a restatement of it? I don't know. It seems like, okay, so this is epistemic privilege with respect to past autonomy. Okay, so this is like a double, so it's a compounded issue. Okay. At this point, some might say that retaining precious memories and preserving one's identity through memory retention are valuable independently of whether these things honor the preferences of our past autonomous selves. For example, in discussing the roles that our friends and relatives can play in buttressing people's identities through the provision of memory-inducing cues, authors such as Cowley, Holton, and Lindemann suggest that preserving one's identity matters in its own right. Though I am sympathetic to such views, trying to vindicate them here would take us too far afield. The same is true, mutatis mutandis, of views on which filial duties to visit parents who have lost the ability to recognize their children derive from the parents' dignity interests. Such views are predicated on the assumption that even when parents no longer remember who their children are, it generally remains a greater affront to their dignity when their children refuse to visit them than when most other individuals refuse to do so, which is thought to be the case even when the parents lack past autonomous wishes for their children to continue to visit them. Whilst I suspect that this is correct, a critic might argue that as long as such parents receive enough social and emotional support from the individuals other than their children, the notion that their dignity is undermined by their children's refusal to regularly visit them simply reflects a social or cultural bias, which of course does not preclude the critic from holding the view that such dignity harms might be incurred when the parents do recognize their children, as well as the view that there are ways in which children could harm the dignity of the parents who no longer recognize them. All that she is committed to is that under the condition described, for children to refrain from visiting their parents does not cause such harm. Since a discussion of this topic is well outside this article's purview, I will note that because dignity is such an abstract value, it is not clear whether defenders of the dignity argument can answer our critic in a non-question begging way. This is why, despite being drawn to the conclusion of this argument, I do not wish to put much weight here on dignity interests either. I just have a further question here. It has to do with the over here when they were saying retaining the memories are part of the duties of and tied to personal identity. This sort of, I mean, I'm trying to understand how to parse this. Is this a medical claim or is this some sort of metaphysical claim? If it's a medical claim on how to preserve what little memory is left, like is it like a drug? If like I gave him this drug, it would preserve a few memories or like would bring them up and refresh them. And so that would be sort of a medical argument here that the children are the best suited to provide this medical rehabilitation of their past selves through inducing memories to come to the surface. If that's so, then that would imply that if we had better drugs, then the children wouldn't need to visit. The other side of it is that it's some sort of metaphysical view that maintaining the identity is a good thing, and that is how is part and parcel is the children interacting with their parents, and that is how we maintain identity more generally, and that's some sort of metaphysics of identity. And then that would be a norm of a metaphysical norm that to do that is some sort of fighting the dementia on the metaphysical level, that you're continuing to upkeep the metaphysics of identity even in the face of dementia in the hopes that somehow the process will stave off the disease, and not in a medical sense, but in some sort of metaphysical sense. It just you might not actually be doing anything biophysically, but in some sense that in maintaining it, the identity is still preserved in some sense, even though other parts are breaking down. So I think the author has made a good point here, but I'm not really sure how to understand this this sort of future oriented this area here, this stuff. So this is a little bit I think there's more to unpack over there. Okay. I haven't dealt with this problem, so haven't had any particular experience dealing with demented relatives. I don't even know if demented is the right word. Relatives with dementia. My grandma used to joke before she died that she didn't have Alzheimer's, she had sometimers. So her memory wasn't perfect, but it wasn't significant enough to even have a diagnosis. It was just like you forget things. Hey, she was old, so you forget a few things here and there, but it wasn't really so bad. So dealing with her really wasn't. I don't have experience with this, so it's all just abstract for me. Okay, generic duties of sociability. Okay. My criticisms of the second interpretation of the conditionality view has hitherto challenged the notion that when parents lose the ability to recognize their children, they cease to have any special interest in being visited by their children, that is, any interest in being visited by them as opposed to strangers. Against this view, I argued that in many cases, filial visits can still make contributions to the well-being and past autonomy of such parents that few, if any, other individuals could make. Yeah, so this is the question of exactly what is being that consists of. That's what I was worried about over here. Anyway, the aim of this subsection is to challenge the major premise of the second interpretation of the conditionality view. According to this premise, children can only have duties to parents who cannot recognize them, and because their parents have special interest in being visited by them. My objection to this premise proceeds on the assumption that we have what I call generic duties of sociability. These are duties to help ensure that others are provided with the adequate opportunities for social contact when this can be done at a reasonable cost. Well, no one has any social contact at the moment. We've got coronavirus everywhere, so this is all broken down in society. Alright, that's a small aside. Which are not just lacking when people are kept in isolation cells or in quarantine. Yes, quarantine. This is right where I am, is why I'm reading so many philosophy papers. To mention two extreme cases, but also when they are unable to visit other people as a result of severe dementia. I don't feel demented though, which is good. What makes such duties generic is that they are owed to humanity as a whole, which distinguishes them from any duties of sociability that we have towards our friends and relatives specifically. Whilst the latter are based on our shared relationships, generic duties of sociability derive from the serious physical, psychological, and developmental harms that chronic loneliness have been found to engender. See the outset of this section. Such harms are not only problematic because they prevent lonely people from living minimally decent lives, although this is clearly a serious problem. They might also compromise people's ability to provide adequate care to others, as well as adversely affect members of society more broadly when feeling social exclusion gives rise to antisocial behavior. Whereas a lot more is to be said in defense of generic duties of sociability, I will not do so here, as Collins and Brownlee have already offered elaborate and compelling defenses. What is pertinent for us is that, inasmuch as we have generic duties of sociability, one may reasonably expect that the best way for many people to discharge these duties will involve providing company to any parents with severe dementia that they might have. There are at least two reasons for this. Do I understand what this actually means? Generic duties of sociability. I mean, so these are some norms of society that, because people are social, we need to maintain. I guess. So I'd have to read the background, but I don't know. Okay, continuing. The first is that individuals with severe dementia are especially vulnerable to chronic loneliness. As was noted, this is due to the social losses that people tend to experience in old age, along with the distinct difficulties that those with dementia face in maintaining social contacts and forging new ones. See the outset of this section. Since any plausible account of generic duties of sociability will require people to make greater efforts to address the social needs of those who are at higher risk of continued loneliness than to address the social needs of those who are at lower risk, all other things being equal, it seems that the social needs of individuals with severe dementia will often need to be prioritized. Note that in this respect, generic duties of sociability are relevantly similar to moral duties to alleviate global poverty. All other things being equal, we have stronger reason for giving money to those who are poorest and who need our resources than those who financially are weaker. The second reason is that many children have a level of affection for their parents that they do not have for most other individuals, with the possible exception of any partners, friends, and other close relatives that they might have. When such ties exist, it will typically be easier for people to establish or maintain a habit of visiting specific individuals, including those with severe dementia, compared to cases where these emotional connections are absent or simply not as strong. This is relevant because it means that by seeking to protect their parents from loneliness rather than individuals who are at equal risk of continued loneliness but towards whom they feel less affection, if any, children will be more likely to comply with their generic duties of sociability, all other things being equal. That's a weird argument. Like, just because they have parents with dementia, then they're more likely to fulfill their duties, at least to them. I guess, but it seems a little backwards, but I guess the argument is that if they're going to fulfill their duties, it would be best that they did it with their parents. Okay. Notice that whilst most children will not reflect upon these issues and consequently not visit their parents with the aim of discharging generic duties of sociability, this does not undermine the point that I am trying to make, which is simply that generic duties of sociability can and often will give rise to duties to visit any parents with severe dementia that we might have. Okay. I mean, it depends on how you cash out this norm of sociability. If the foregoing is correct, then even if parents generally cease to have any special interest in being visited by their children once they lose the ability to recognize them, as I have denied within the previous sections, it does not follow that the children cannot have duties to visit them. For as I have shown here, there are good grounds for thinking that we have generic duties of sociability, and that for a large proportion of children, the most reliable way to discharge these duties involves visiting any parents with severe dementia that they might have. I don't know if I buy the structure of the argument in this section. It seems like the generic duties of sociability was just sort of defined here, and I don't know if I actually buy. I mean, I'd have to go back and read the background stuff here to actually buy if I understand this sort of duty, the duties required of someone socially. before I could say that this is actually doing anything, because otherwise it's just I'm assuming this is the case, and then then the author says, well, this is how you fulfill those duties, but that just seems by declaration, really. They've just defined it that way, but I don't know where the duty is, so I can't actually understand how it plays out. But I can take the author's word for it here because I don't know, and it seems reasonable. What they're saying is reasonable. I nitpick arguments, so well, there it is. Gratitude. This brings us to a final possible ground of filial duties to visit parents who cannot recognize their children. Some will argue that children have duties to show gratitude towards their parents, at least when the parents have not done anything that would render displays of gratitude inappropriate, such as physically abuse their children, and that complying with these duties will often require that they regularly visit their parents, even if the latter has lost the capacity to remember who they are. Those who hold this view need to vindicate three assumptions. The first is that children can incur duties to show gratitude towards their parents as a result of sacrifices that their parents have made for them and sometimes continue to make. The second assumption is that, for at least some children, such gratitude can only be duly displayed by protecting their parents from loneliness, among other possible ways in which they might have to express their gratitude that do not offer such protection, at least not in any straightforward sense. For example, they might be duty-bound to send packages to the parents with the latter's favorite food or music. The third assumption is that for at least some of the children, protecting their parents from loneliness is possible only if they regularly visit them. Can these assumptions be vindicated? Insofar as there are children who are duty-bound to show gratitude towards their parents, I think it is plausible that in many cases for them to discharge these duties will require that they help protect their parents from loneliness, whatever else they might be required to do. This follows from the twin facts that 1. Appropriate displays of gratitude will take into account the interests of the benefactors, and that 2. Many parents with severe dementia have stronger interest in being protected from loneliness than in receiving goods from their children, including gifts. Given that 3. A large share of children can only realistically protect their parents from loneliness by visiting them, even when there is the possibility of paying others to provide regular company on their behalf, doing so will be prohibitively expensive for many, apart from the fact that it might contravene the parents' autonomous preferences. See the penultimate section. This would suggest that children with parents who cannot recognize them have gratitude-based duties to visit their parents. If I'm right that 1 to 3 are correct, then the successive gratitude-based arguments for filial duties to visit parents who have lost the ability to recognize their children turns on whether it is possible for children to owe their parents displays of gratitude. Whereas several authors subscribe to this view, it should be noted that this is not uncontroversial. For example, Wellman has argued that gratitude is a virtue and that this precludes it from being something that can be owed. Yet even when duties of gratitude are not considered to be incoherent, my experience is that a significant proportion of scholars believe filial duties of gratitude are rare. One common reason for this is that they believe only extraordinary sacrifices, whether supererogatory or not, can give rise to duties of gratitude, and that most parents do not make such sacrifices for their children. Another is that they think that we can only owe gratitude for such acts to which we have meaningfully consented. Since many of the sacrifices that parents make for their children are ones in which the children never meaningfully consent, as they are made during the latter's early childhood, this too would be substantially reduce the scope of filial duties of gratitude. My grandma always said she didn't really care for Mother's Day. She said she always chose to be a mother, so she didn't actually think she was like I chose to be a mother. I don't need like special recognition for that. So she always thought that gratitude in that way was, I mean, she wanted gratitude for lots of other stuff, but she didn't want gratitude just for being a parent. She was like, well, I chose to be a parent. So, I mean, I understand this because she had, like basically verbatim said she didn't want gratitude for being a mother because she chose to be it. Okay. Alright, I believe that there are some promising responses to these objections. As discussion of these is beyond the article's remit, however, I will just end by noting that if one believes that at least some children have duties to show gratitude towards their parents, then it is even more likely than I've suggested here that children can, oftentimes do, have duties to visit parents who no longer recognize them. In an age where many societies are aging rapidly and where a cure for Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia remains to be found, these are important conclusions. Okay, interesting stuff. A lot of tough questions to ask about dementia and things like that. I feel like Confucian scholars have a lot to say about how you're supposed to treat your parents. I don't know about enough about Confucian ethics, but I did hear someone give a talk once, and this exact sort of issue came up. How do you deal with you're really they put a great weight on uh, children's what they owe their parents, or I don't know how exactly to put it, but they've said a great deal about this, and so I feel like there is something. I'm sure they have something to say about this. This is definitely I didn't see any references to Confucian philosophy, so this is Western centric, but that's fine. But it just seems like I know the Confucians have specifically they're really concerned with how the child is supposed to care of their parent at the end of life. That's something they've said about. So it ought to be have some import on this topic. Okay. Other than that, I had a question on epistemic privilege and how are we to understand epistemic privilege? Is this metaphysical or medical privilege? Like, is bringing up old memories good medically, or is it good in some sense as part of the identity that needs to be maintained in some sort of metaphysical sense, even if it's not medically required? And so that I find to be that's a very interesting issue that's going on over there. Anywho, that's it for now. I hope you enjoyed it. Please send me something to read, or any other comments, questions, or suggestions for Philosophy Roulette. And stay safe, everyone, and have a good day. Bye bye. Be back Tuesday.